Hey everybody, it's Bust with our 5 decks to try in the upcoming Eternal season. And so the Fates Voyage Onward variety patch is here, the 4.11 patch if you will. The patch notes are up on the main site, the Play Runeterra site, and as this video is released, the card should be available for play and purchase and deck building in the matter of 2 or 3 hours. And so I highly recommend, if you haven't checked out the patch notes yet, to go to the Play Runeterra site, give a peek at the patch notes page here, see all of the cards that change across both Standard and Eternal, along with the 10 or so new cards added into the format. And so it is worth noting before we dive in, we are speaking to Eternal here. Standard is relevant in this variety patch season. It's typically just Eternal into the Eternal Open, and then you're kind of done with it. But with the Worlds Qualifier event happening the week after the Eternal Open, there's definite reasons to play Standard this season. And so I wanted to call that out. We are focusing in on Eternal at the moment. We'll look to touch towards Standard as that Worlds Qualifier event comes forth. And so, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into the decks. And so, first and foremost, you must speak to Twisted Fate Janna. I think this is far and away going to be the most popular deck in the format, and this is going to be the baseline in which every single other deck in the format is built towards and built because of. And so, at its core, very, very similar to what you see in the Nyla Janna decks of the standard decks of the previous 2 months. But the things to call out now are, of course, Janna, updated within the variety patch to now take 8 cards to flip, and then the Divine Whirlwind only dealing 1 point of damage to the opponent's Nexus when cast. And so my suspicion in terms of what we're going to see with Janna is that the aggro decks aren't really going to cut it anymore. They were already falling out of favor for the Sunken Temple Elephant versions of the deck, but with Janna being harder to flip and harder to actually connect with combat damage, and the Divine Whirlwind doing 2 and 3 and 4 points less damage each game, I think those aggro decks are really just going to fall by the wayside, and the vast majority of the Janna decks we see are going to involve the Sunken Temple. And so at its core, the Sunken Temple is really the big build-around aspect of this deck. It's the fuel that really fires everything that's happening. We're, of course, used to seeing it activate Janna and get all the updrafts and the card draws to fuel everything happening in terms of cheapening up your cards and spewing off, but it really has another dimension to the deck with Twisted Fate. If you have a 5-card hand with the Sunken Temple on the board, as you roll into the next turn, you're going to redraw those 5 cards, 1 for the turn, 1 for the temple. That gets you up to 7. You are now extremely, extremely close to flipping your Twisted Fate without really even doing anything, right? And so the thing that really worries me about this deck is that Twisted Fate is just naturally powerful. He's one of the most versatile champions throughout the course of the game. Sunken Temple is just naturally powerful on its own. And through any course of game that we play, we're going to be happy to play Twisted Fate without the Temple. We're going to be happy to play the Temple without Twisted Fate, but using them in conjunction together is just super, super, super powerful. And so I really expect this same Nyla Janna core that we've seen over the course of the past 2 months to really carry over into the Eternal season, but flipping the Nyla in for Twisted Fate, given that he has such a high power level and what he can do flipped with all of the various cards, in addition to the utility that he gets on the level 1 side. And so I think what we have here is a pretty good base. Depending on how the format pans out, you're going to see some changes to the variety and the flex cards that you have in this deck. As it stands right now, we're playing heavy metals. Jax Ornn is a standby in terms of being good in Eternal, and I think having that heavy metal is a good place to start, as we also tend to see a bunch of aggro decks at the beginning of the season. Heavy metal is capable of taking down a lot of the units in decks like pirates, and so I think that's a good start. I think pick a card is an interesting piece that can be added to the puzzle within this deck. It is the Twisted Fate flip card, but as we look at cards like Eye of the Storm, these are cards that actually put you ahead in terms of mana, or in terms of cards. So you play your 1 Eye of the Storm, you pick up a card, you draw 1 additional card, so you get that +1 card advantage. Pick a card leaves you even in terms of card advantage, right? You have to cycle a card away to draw 2 on the next turn, but it does let you start activating your Exalted Cloudwinders and your Windborne Mariners at a very cheap rate, starting on turn 3 or turn 4. And so I'm curious to see how the pick a card actually plays out within this deck. It certainly could be flexed away to another removal spell or another draw 2, but I think it's very interesting what we'll see with the Twisted Fate flip card and pick a card in terms of its ability as just an activator for the deck. And, if it's on turn 2 and you don't want your Wizened Helmsman, you can just cycle him away until later. Lots of interesting plays that can come up with the pick a card. And so I know it's not very inventive. This is not a rarity in terms of what you're going to be seeing in the upcoming days, but I think it's extremely important to stop and think about a deck like Janna Twisted Fate in terms of what you're doing with your other deck building if it's not something that you intend to play yourself. Up next, we have Nasus Kindred, and so this is featuring the new card in Dune Swallower. And so my big piece on Dune Swallower was like, wow, this is a fantastic way to just kill your opponent with atrocity. And so it's very obviously centered towards working with the slay mechanics, requiring you to slay one of your own units before you play it. But having this 9 power spell shielded unit is just primed and ready for an atrocity. If you're able to deal that 11 damage to your opponent while banking some mana across the way, you can just outright kill your opponent on turn 6 with this, right? If you have 1 banked spell mana, you can play that 7 mana atrocity and then nug your opponent for 9. And so I expect some very, very high-powered plays to come out of the Dune Swallower. If you can hook down your opponent's only 3 attack unit with the Blighted Caretaker, allow the Dune Swallower to connect on a fearsome attack, and then have the atrocity a little bit later, that's just a 18-point swing that's just going to take down essentially any game that it comes across. And so I'm very, very, very interested in the Dune Swallower in this type of deck. As it stands, I have moved away from like Thresh. You have the choice of Thresh Nasus or Kindred Nasus in this style of deck. I just think having these curves of playing any unit in the early game, Kindred on turn 4, and then killing off that unit on turn 5 to get the Dune Swallower on board, he's just immediately ready for combat, right? He's way overstatted and he's going to be able to take anything down, but you also get that Kindred activation along the way. It's just an incredibly, incredibly powerful curve coming out of this style of deck. And then again, if you do have one of these really high-powered early game aggressive draws to where you drop the Bakai Reaper into a Cursed Keeper into a Ravenous Butcher, you're getting your opponent very, very, very close to dead on turn 2, or you're getting them very close to that dead mark of atrocity starting right out the gates on turn 2. And so very interested in seeing how this deck pans out. I'm curious about the mix of cards that we'll need after we play this a little bit longer in terms of having enough targets to sacrifice off to cards like Dune Swallower and Blighted Caretaker. As it stands for this current deck list, we've taken the fading icons out, but I could certainly see the idea of adding more fading icons in to have the sacrificial cards there. With that point in mind, we are playing a full 3 copies of Vile Feast in this list so that we have that early game interactive removal that does give us a Spiderling on the board to sacrifice off to something else. But I think the core idea here is very, very good. Just a common game curve of 1-drop into 2-drop into the Undying, into Kindred, into the Dune Swallower is extremely challenging for an opponent to deal with. And then it just has these ultra high roll draws to where we have the Butchers and the Keepers curving out a lot of early damage into a Dune Swallower that can atrocity away for the win. I expect this to be another extremely high-powered deck in this upcoming meta. Moving on to deck number 3, we can move away from that control space, those expensive atrocity style of things, and move in to where the real brewers desire. We got this Kingfisher deck lined up here for you now. And so if you're not familiar with the Kingfisher, it is the new Demacian Boat, a 9 mana 8/8 that when it's summoned, you draw 1 of each champion from your deck. And then more importantly to us, each round, the first time after you summon a champion, you rally. And so the idea that we're looking to pop off with the Kingfisher is if we get to cheapen up its cost with Valyr's Prophet, great. That would be awesome if we could play the Kingfisher for 7 or 8 mana. But we're looking to mainly draw 2 champions off of this. We'll gladly draw the 4 that we have in the deck, but number 1, we want to hit Lucian so that we can play the Kingfisher and then immediately play Lucian and rally. And so that's piece number 1 that we're looking to pull off with this. Piece number 2 is if we play the Kingfisher, get Jarvan into our hand, move into the next turn, attack. So we'll make our open attack for the turn. The Jarvan will come down since he's in hand and we have the mana to get him on board. We'll immediately get another rally and that should close out the game. And so I really like this high-powered aspect of using the Kingfisher along with both Lucian and Jarvan. And then one of the real high points in that's you don't have to include tons of copies of these champions into your deck. And so we're still able to have the kind of standard 2 Gallios that the style of Formidable's deck will play. We can get a flexed Volibear in if we're in a kind of grindy matchup, and we see a lot of really interesting spaces that those champions can work with. And still, while we're playing the Valyr's Prophet, we have some wonderful targets for it, and the Gallio, the Volibear, the Anakas off of the Darkened Spear. At its core, this is that Formidable's deck that we've seen over the past 2 or 3 months, but I think the Kingfisher gives it a real edge if this turns out to be a very mid-range heavy kind of format where we're able to develop into turn 8, turn 9, turn 10. And if we're out of this space to where Cosmic Call is gone and we're not just dead on turn 8 every time. And so the big limiting factor for this for sure will be what the break point is for the average game end time. You know, if we're able to get into turn 8, turn 9 most of the games, the Kingfisher's really going to have an opportunity to pop off. If this is a faster meta, this one's probably going to be stuck in the space of casual land. But still very interested in giving this one a try. There's no denying that these Kingfisher turns are absolutely enormous. Up next, we are moving into the aggro space. Here we have Annie Katarina's Ziggs. And so this deck is looking to feature the newly released Enraged Flamespitter. I am highly, highly excited to come in and try this card. It does just a monumental amount of work. And so a 12 stat, 6 drop, not that bad of a price. Coming down, killing an opposing unit and dealing 2 damage to the opposing face is pretty good, but then having Challenger is kind of nice as well. The problem with Enraged Flamespitter is it doesn't have Elusive Overwhelm and it doesn't have access to rallies, right? And so this deck looks to fix the rally and overwhelm piece of the problem with the Enraged Flamespitter. We're looking to use Mites and Absolvers to give the Flamespitter the overwhelm, and then we have access to Katarina to potentially provide some rallies. And so this was a Annie-based aggro deck that was kind of popular a few seasons ago. It was looking to use Katarina generating Blades Edges and Ziggs to activate skills. It has Legion Saboteurs and Imperial Demolitionists to be skill-type cards as well. You have a lot of tie-ins to Annie with this early game aggression. And then you have some burn to finish the day off with the likes of Nox and Fervor and Ruinous Path going directly to the opponent's nugget. But again, the key that we're really looking to add into this deck is that Enraged Flamespitter. Help us level up Annie with the playability, help us get that direct damage to the opponent's face if we want to be activating things like Pirouette, maybe kill off a unit to activate the Ruinous Paths. Just a lot of activations that we get out of this kind of ability. And then giving it Overwhelm is, of course, fantastic. Nothing wrong with attacking with a 10 or a 12 power Overwhelm unit. To me, the thing that's going to be interesting with this deck is how easy it is to flip Annie and how easy it is to flip Katarina. Katarina is a fairly easy flip. She just needs to attack and not die in the process. But we want to get that Absolver leveled up to the to the space of getting the second copy in hand, and so we need to see how challenging it is to level up our champions. Surprisingly, one of the potential avenues you can take if you're looking to ensure your Absolvers get leveled up is there is the Secret Keeper. Is he the right card? The 2/4 for 3 mana out of Shurima that shuffles level 2 champions into your deck. And so if you're really looking to ensure that you have a level 2 with the Absolver, you can use that card. But I think it's worth keeping the memeage to the side for a while and just trying to stick to our guns here with Annie and Katarina. I think if we really want to ensure we get that champion flip, we can look to just include more skill-based cards in the deck for Annie and the third copy of Katarina, as opposed to going in deep with the Secret Keeper, if you will. Last but not least, we are coming back to Pirates. Now, Pirates is a very interesting deck. This is one of these decks that should absolutely never fall out of the meta. The Cosmic Call meta of the previous Eternal season was one that was actually able to push Pirates out. There was just so much heal coming out of the Cosmic Call decks between the 1/4 Stellacorn and the Cosmic like heal 4 and invoke thing, and then people figuring out the Sump Monument with the Starlit Epiphany. It was just like super easy to push Pirates out of the meta if you wanted to. And then what kind of happened was, some people played the anti-pirates deck, some people didn't, but the anti-pirate stuff was around to such a degree that it was a very challenging deck to actually want to bring. But with the nerfs to Cosmic Call coming out, I suspect that this is going to give pirates a chance to rise back up to the occasion and jump back into the meta. And so as every single meta comes about, if you're just looking to quickly climb up, if you just want to say, okay, I want to hit Masters from Platinum in the first couple of days, and then just jump into Standard for the Worlds Qualifier, you can absolutely just take Pirates and come in and do that. And so it's worth calling out. To me, the interesting addition here is going to be the update to Dame the Despoiler. He now has Overwhelm, and as a deck that very, very, very easily goes wide, and a deck that can pretty easily hit Plunders, I think this overwhelming Dame the Despoiler really has a chance to pop off in a deck like this. And so I'm curious if the mix of units is okay here. I did make some concessions, like playing 3 Imperial Demolitionists and the 2 copies of Make It Rain to ensure we had pre-combat ways to get plunders onto our opponents, but we can most certainly hit a post-combat plunder with Dame, given the way that Pirates typically functions. But looking at this as a 3-3 Overwhelm, not quite good enough to make the cut, but if we're getting, say, like +3 stats out of Dame, getting a 9-stat 3-drop with Overwhelm is exceptionally powerful. And then if we have some kind of draw involving Mirai Wardens and a bunch of 2-drop or a bunch of 1-drops in it, it's very, very easy to think that we can just like attack, still have 3 or 4 units on the board, get a plunder in, play the Dame, and boost up everybody. Whether or not for the next combat will be up in the air, but I think Dame has a lot of possibility to be the new flex card coming out of Pirates, given that this ability can be incredibly powerful when it works, and when it doesn't, you still have a reasonably statted Overwhelm unit. And so that's it. That's 5 decks to try for the upcoming Eternal Season. I hope we gave you something to try out in your upcoming battles. And so, like the decks, don't like them, agree, disagree, love to hear it in the comments. And that is going to do it for us today. So I hope everyone enjoyed the video. Hope you maybe learned a thing or two along the way, and you had a good time watching. This is Bust, and we thank you for being here.